Sixes. Sixes are harmony. Tiferet, the sun. They're also very much about the identity, the ego. And when I say ego, I don't mean that in a negative way. Like a lot of times when people talk about ego in this modern culture, we use it as a bad word, like that's ego, man, a lot of ego. Well, let me tell you, if you don't have an ego, you're not going to be of much use to anybody, because ego is how we exist as eyes. So you got to have one. But so the sixes are really about, again, we're back in the center on the tree. So we've moved back into a state of balance. These are almost always fortunate cards. I mean, it's almost hard to find a bad meaning for some of them, but let's do it anyway. Why not? We can be negative. We can be negative about anything. All right, so let's look at the Six of Wands. Oh, this one's actually kind of easy. So the Six of Wands shows a guy riding on a horse with the laurel wreath, the victor, and this is clearly meant to represent that moment when one's creativity is really high on the horse. It's things are really going well. You're feeling on the positive side. This is a card of victory. It's success. It's where you feel really seen and appreciated, and it's all that good stuff. And it's the sun is shining. The sun is shining and it's fire, which is nice. So you're feeling really creative, really self-expressive. The difficulty with this card is that sometimes when we are in this moment, we don't want to see the belly. There's always an underbelly, right? And so this can occasionally be a card of arrogance. Everything's going well, you become complacent. You think it's really you. Gosh, aren't I swell? Instead of, recognizing that this is, again, a passing phase, a good one, let's enjoy it by all means. But it's not the totality of reality, and you can't make it last. It's going to pass. Everything passes. Everything changes. And so, when that card comes up, especially if you see further down the path in the reading that maybe some tough stuff's on the way, you might have to say, while you're having this good moment, this is a good time to, think about the ants and the grasshoppers and store up your good, store up your goodies, because stuff happens, So, the Six of Wands that's kind of that. So the main thing about that is again, not becoming oblivious, because you're in that creative full flush. Yeah.
One thing I just noticed on this picture here is that the horse has like a skirt on, and when you were talking about the belly with that skirt there, you can't see the belly.
See it.
You can't see the underside. You can't see the other things that are falling on the ground from the horse as well.
Oh my God. This is a man who thinks like I do. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That really is. That is brilliant. I hope that we got that on tape.
She's going to use that one again.
Yeah, I will. I'm stealing that one. Wow. That's great. Yeah, and I like the fact that the barding on the horse is green. So there's that sense of prosperity and everything being good. Green is, of course, associated with prosperity. Also Venus. Let's look at the Six of Pentacles. This again is a happy card. Now we're talking about this beautiful energy as it moves into the realm of the material. So clearly a card of wealth. And this is a great card about, having an abundance in which one can give freely. So this is nice. The coffers are full in every sense. And it might even, and it can also mean, just the whole level of not just money, but one's material comfort, one's home life. You're just feeling a sense of abundance. This is sort of, and it's interesting if we look at the progression from the 5 to the 6s. So in the 5s, there's this terror of poverty and loss, and I'm not going to have enough. And in the 6 is just the reverse. It's like, wow, I'm really doing well here. And of course, the tricky thing about the 6, and that I always remind people, is having a good sense of balance about giving and receiving. And this is not an instance where one is likely to be accumulating. It's just the reverse. If anything, the downside of this card is sometimes people give too much. So the Sun is Tiferet is all about service and love and self-sacrifice. But sometimes there's too much of a good thing. And so this card often comes up in the readings of people who are caretakers. You know, and they just give too much. Like the mom who just, she puts herself on the bottom of the list every time, and, there are people who do this. So that's the downside of the 6 of Pentacles, is not having an appropriate boundary around giving too much.
It kind of shows too how the pentacles aren't symmetrically lined up.
That's true, they aren't, are they? And, where is the other one? Oh, I see it. Yeah, 2 on one side, 4 on the other. And then, the other thing is the scales. So, in a well-balanced person, there's a willingness to give that comes from abundance, but you have the scales. So you give, you weigh and you measure. You give in an appropriate way. In the unbalanced person, the merchant forgets the scale and gives too much. That's a problem. I like this card a lot. It's an important card. It's a very important card. 6 of, where are we? 6 of Wands? No, we did Wands. Cups. This is an interesting card. So this again, let's think about Tiferet. It's about love. It's about, but it's about a very self-sacrificing, service-related kind of love. Whether it's love of the self, again, in one's own relationship to oneself or relationship to others. And that's why in this particular picture, they have children. There's an innocence here. There's this card is about the open-heartedness of the child. One that gives without thinking, one loves without thinking about whether or not I'm going to get mine or enough is going to come back. This is often a marriage card. It's also a card of profound and deep friendships where people really, there's a tremendous meeting of the minds, a tremendous, giving. I just love this picture, the two little children in the garden. And it's all very much about an unegotistical kind of love, where one doesn't think about the self. Now, when would this be a negative thing? Well, it's a negative thing mostly if it shows up in a relationship reading where you have a lot of other cards that indicate that the person is in a relationship to someone who is predatory, abusive, or uncaring. You don't want to see this card then, because what you say is, whoa, here you stand with this total open heart, and you're not thinking about what you're going to get. So in other words, this is very similar to what we just looked at with the merchant in the 6 of Pentacles. There's a way where one can come from this place of love, which is very divine, and yet it's not always appropriate. If the person that you're choosing to be in relationship to isn't on the same page, then it becomes a situation of abuse. So that's a problem. That's a problem. And one of the ways to remember this is that Tiferet, the sun, on the Tree of Life, is always about divine service. It's the Sephirah of Christ figures, any of those mythological figures who die for others, like Orpheus and Dionysus and Christ, and that's the sphere of that kind of willingness to die, to be sacrificed, to give oneself up for others. And that's a beautiful and a wonderful thing, but it has to be in the right place. Or it becomes martyrdom. So that's the difficulty with the Six of Cups. And it's very hard for people to see if they have that active, because the card itself mitigates against it. So if somebody has that square in their, in their own house or their own, how they're thinking about things, and then they're in a relationship it's not a good relationship, they can't see it. Because they're not in it for them. They're in it, in this other way. Six of Swords. This is a very interesting card because it's okay. So now we're looking at this sense of service, this the ego, but it's in the realm of thought. And what this is about when thought goes to a new place. And it's generally a transition for the better. So it's leaving behind the Five of Swords. It's leaving behind the old ideas, the old beliefs, and moving to the new land. And one of the ideas in the picture is that these are almost like refugees or pioneers who are leaving behind the old country and going to the new country. But if you look really closely at that little thumbnail, you'll see that the water that is behind them is rough and the water that is ahead is smooth. So this is generally a good card because what it's about is it's where thought is moving in a positive direction. You're leaving behind old thought structures that don't serve you anymore in order to come into a bigger mythos, a bigger pattern of thought. So something that will serve you better. And so, I like this card a lot. And it's funny because it's the most negative looking of the four, but in some ways I think it's one of the more positive. And, but it does imply that one has to let go of what does not serve you. And so you may have to say that too. You may have to say, well, here's the thing about this card is if you just let go of those old ideas and move on, you have to let go of what does not serve you. You have to look at your patterns of thought. What serves you? And if it doesn't serve you, let it go. You have to let it go. So that would be that one. Sixes. Now let's move to the sevens. Wait, did we do them all? Yeah. Seven of Wands. Oh, I love this one.
What's sevens about?
Sevens. Sevens are about Netzach. Once again, Venus. So it's down here, number 7 on the tree. It's Venus. It's Netzach. And remember that this is about the realm of the ideal. And so there's a way too that, you keep bouncing back and forth into these ideas, but they get more and more elaborated as you go down, right? So up here, we have the idea that underlies all the form, right? And then it works itself through, and then we're down here. This is about, if this is the idea or the form that underlies everything, this is about what makes you passionate, what makes you want to move forward. So going back to an earlier image that I worked with, we had, so if you talk about a vision, like Gandhi had a vision of a free India, and this is the passionate connection to that ideal. All right? And so that's the actual emotion that draws one, the intensity of that when, and we all feel that, like you can have an idea, but when it really resonates, then it becomes a driving, impelling force, right? That's Netzach. Venus, the awakener, the great awakener. Where does Venus come from? She comes blown in across the surface of the waters. She is beauty that is born from the deeps of the unconscious, from the ocean itself, and from time. One of the things that's interesting about the story of the myth of Venus is that when Kronos, Saturn, was castrated by his son Zeus in the great battle against the Titans, the blood from his severed genitals fell into the ocean, and Venus was the result. So think about that. Time and beauty. Time creates beauty. There's a way where, oh well, that's another whole story. But anyhow, what it's about is this notion of beauty that impels, that it awakens us, that makes us, that connects us up or reconnects us up to that purpose. It's another version of this on a lower level. This is that impulse to bring something into being. Down here, it's become a drive. It's become a drive. Instinctual drive. Intellectual drive. Emotional drive. So now it's become that great seductive energy, which has its good moments and its bad moments. Now, if we look at the Seven of Wands, and we see that, this is what the card that I nicknamed King of the Mountain. You ever play that when you were a kid? You know, you stand on something like, we used to play it on top of a compost heap. But anyhow, you're up there, and the other guys try to knock you off. It's fun. And so everybody comes at you all at once. And the trick is to stay on top of it. You got to be moving fast. Seven of Wands. So now we have, once again, we had that moment of victory in the Six of Wands, and now we've moved into activity. But the trick is, as we get further and further down the tree, now the trick is to stay focused. Because now you're really having fun, and you're getting out there, and you're making stuff happen, and you're creating, and it's really easy to forget the original plan. You know? So the trick is you got to stay on top of it. You got to keep your focus. And it's hard to sometimes keep your focus because you're having fun. You know? And it's flowing and there's lots of vision, and I feel this sometimes, you know. My ideas start to move really fast and really in full creative burn, and you have to keep on track. Right? So the trick is with the Seven of Wands is to keep on track. And to not let yourself get unbalanced, right? To not lose grip of what it is you're doing. And, so you could read that either way. You can say, well, you're really busy right now and a lot of stuff's happening, but you're staying on top of it. Or if there are other cards around it that seem to give it a more negative spin, you can say, you know what? You're flailing around here. And you need to remember to reconnect with your plan, right? So that can be getting lost in the action. It's a little bit like the 5 in some ways. The 5 is like you can't see the forest for the trees, and the 7 is you get moving so fast that sometimes you just it's right on the edge of my mind. There's that thing that happens when you're so busy trying to put out fires that you can't really pay attention to anything. You're just, yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to say about that one, but it looks like the guy's fighting here, and he's surrounded by so many that he doesn't know which one to hit.
Right, exactly. What do I do first?
Yeah.
Right. So it's what this card is really about in a negative sense, it's loss of focus.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's because I can't make a decision which one to hit first, or I'm just moving so fast that I'm just kind of whacking away, but it's loss of focus. That's the problem, right? On the other hand, there is the positive side to this. There are moments when we are really firmly grounded in the flow of the vision, where we can do it. By God, we can keep those 10 balls in the air. It's just crazy. It doesn't happen but you all know that. That's the moment when you're in the zone. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. There's a scene in the beginning where the girl is blind. Well, we think she's blind. I think but she's blindfolded at any rate. But and she's protecting herself from an armed assailant with a sword, and it's all without vision. And that's that in the positive sense. When you're so in the zone that you know you're perfectly balanced, that would be the positive side of that card. And it comes from being totally in a net sock space, in that Venusian space where you are so in the flow. You can do it. Let's go to the eight. Eights are Mercury.
Did you do all seven?
Right, we were only halfway. We
We
did 7 of Wands.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. 7 of Cups. Oh, another of my favorites. All right, so the 7 of Cups. Now this is one of those combinations where you have, a suit that is intrinsically, it's about the inner and the intuitive and the emotional, and then you combine it with Venus, which is all about the ideal and the beautiful, and what you get is, oh my gosh, this is a case where the dreamer, the person in the card in a sense, is presented with so many possibilities that it's often hard to choose. Or alternatively, there's a kind of being lost in a fantasy, lost in the fantasy realm. That's probably the most common meaning of this card, is that when we get lost in our dreams, we're fantasizing. And we're fantasizing about all this really wonderful stuff. And that's problematic in the sense that we need dreams to drive us forward, but we have to do something with them, right? And so in order to be effective, and if you're thinking about the realm of relationships, in order to finally really have a relationship, you have to finally choose. You have to choose. At least in the realm of monogamy. I don't know about other people's stuff, but I mean, and it also in terms of yourself. At some point, there may be many parts of yourself that you love, many parts of yourself that you want to develop, but at some point, you have to plunk your energy down and go for some portion of it. Because otherwise, what happens is all of that desire becomes too diffuse, and it never actually becomes focalized. So this is a reflection in a sense of Saturn, right? Because Saturn is about, okay, gotta limit, gotta pull it down, gotta contain. This is a very similar thing in that you have to finally put your money on one horse, and let it go. Because otherwise, you're just gonna, and this is an interesting, I always like this card because it's something that I struggle with in my own personal life, because there's always so many possibilities and there's always so many projects and I love them all. There's not a single one I don't like, and then suddenly I'm doing like 14-hour days and I'm wondering why I'm falling over. So, the Seven of Cups is about being able to choose a vision and stick with it. On the positive side, when this card shows up, you can say, well, golly, you got a lot of possibilities here. There's some really cool stuff, but you also have to make up your mind, and that also means discriminating between the real and the illusory. So when you look at those cups, there's all kinds of things. There's a snake coming out of the cup. There's the mysterious veiled object. I'd never figure out what that one is. It's the great glowing penis in the dark. I don't know. And then there's the crowned head. And so, well, it does kind of look that way, doesn't it? There's something really phallic about that thing. And that's what comes to my mind. Tells you where my brain is. But anyway, that's what happens when you have no. Never mind. That's Sagittarius moon. So in other words, you have to begin to distinguish between the real and the illusory, between the valuable and the fantasy. And so the positive is that there are choices, there are dreams. It's certainly better than not having any. But the negative is, if you don't zero in and hone in and really connect, You're gonna lose your moment. I love that card. It's a funny card, isn't it? 7 of Swords. Wait a minute, what happened to the Pentacles? Let's go to the 7 of Pentacles. So, 7 of Pentacles. Oh yeah, I think I talked about this earlier. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this. This is great. So, you know, this could be one of two things. It can be a pause in the action, and this is a positive, where one takes a pause in the action to sort of assess and remember your vision. Or also to savor the moment. That's a positive. To really get in touch with, gosh, I'm really enjoying this garden today. Isn't it beautiful? The sun is shining, the air is so fresh. Look at my plants, aren't they wonderful? You know, and that's an important thing. When you're working hard, you have to remember to stop and reconnect with the pleasure of it. The thing that's making you do it in the first place. That's the positive. The negative of this card is it's also easy to just kind of be dreaming about your garden, but you don't pick up your hoe and do the weeding. And so that's where, you know, instead of just pausing, it becomes kind of a drifting off into la la land. But don't forget that positive. That's an important positive. That pause in action. I like that. And then we come to the 7 of Swords. This is a very tricky card. So now we have Venus in the realm of thought. Venus is a very seductive energy. And this is about seductive ideas. One of the most seductive ideas is to see if you can take shortcuts. Well, maybe I don't have to fight that other army. Maybe I can just sneak into their camp and steal their swords. But of course, if you only steal some of the swords and you leave others behind, then it's likely that they're going to come after you and beat you up. So, you know, it's also about trying to be disarming, right? He's trying to disarm the enemy. And so there's a way where we can try to be very charming and very seductive rather than doing the really hard work of negotiating. So this is about the tendency to try to shirk the hard work and instead be clever. Oh gosh, there are a million fables about this. You know, Reynard the Fox, you know, there are all those fables about where, you know, you outsmart yourself, basically.
Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Sorcerer's Apprentice. Let's see, is that Sorcerer? Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Alan. So do you guys remember that? That's the Mickey Mouse, you know, who he decides like, oh man, I'm really tired of schlepping up the stairs with these buckets, and maybe if I just take this wand, you know, and then the next thing you know, we have an out of control process, right? So this is about when we, instead of using the powers of the mind to really discriminate, to take on responsibility, to do what we need to do, we try to take shortcuts. We try to outsmart our way, we try to charm our way through the situation. And it's a slippery slope, that one. And it almost always backfires. This is a pretty negative card.
Is there an upside to it? Or not?
Well, yeah, there is. There is in the sense that sometimes you can pull it off. And if you had a lot of cards around it that indicated tremendous mental acuity and cleverness, you might be able to pull it off. But then the question is it really in your best interest to do so? Even if you can get away with it, is it in your best interest to do so? You know, and
Can you think of an example what it would be?
yeah, well, let me think for a minute. So what would that be? Well, yes, like,
How about gathering ideas from others? Is something about
Yes.
incorporating them, something like that?
yeah, I'm just thinking about that. So there's a way where,
You just
yes,
look so
I
smooth.
was just thinking, looking at the picture here, he has a red hat on. So wouldn't that be using a positive Martian mental attitude when dealing with this type of activity?
Yeah, and it can be a kind of cleverness that does serve you, where you see something coming and you're able to forestall it by doing an end run around somebody.
Doing the unexpected rather than
Like
the
a clever
expected.
tactic in a
Yeah.
battle.
Yeah,
Like in the movies, you see these guys do these things, you're like, I wish I would've thought of
Yeah.
that.
yeah, right, exactly. And in fact, we all have those moments too, where you come out after you do a rerun of the conversation, and then you think, oh, I could have said blah 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 blah. Of course, too bad you didn't think about it at the time, but yeah. But there is a way where you can be clever, and it can work for you. Yeah.
In other words, you'd have to really think it through well to begin with, and then you'd also have to execute it really well.
That's exactly right, and that's where this guy's in trouble. The idea was smart, his execution was. That's it. The idea was smart, but the execution was sloppy. So if you can use the smart idea and then execute it well, okay. And there is that sort of Venusian, the Venusian charm that can sometimes be really useful. So the positive side is if you can harness that kind of being able to see an easier way but then carry it out with detail, then it's a good thing. But it's sometimes hard to do. All right, let's see. Did we do the 7 of?
Yeah, we've got them all now.
We got them all. All right, now we're moving on to the 8s. Let's go to the 8 of Wands. 8s are about Mercury. Mercury. Now Mercury, or Hermes, who is of course the patron of all Hermetic philosophers, therefore very near and dear to my heart. Hermes is many things. He's the god of thieves. He's clever. It's a very mental energy. It's very technological. It's all about the how-to, being able to figure stuff out. If Venus is all about the why I'm doing it, Mercury is all about the how I'm gonna do it. And we often say that when we look at personality formation, this is the triangle of personality. This determines, your feeling states and what you love and what you are drawn to. And this determines how you think. And people are often more on one side or the other. So people who are analytical and tend to be more over here. People who are more, emotional and intuitive tend to be more over here. Like if you were doing a Myers-Briggs, this would be your judging, thinking. This is your sensing, feeling types. But Mercury is very much about the mind and about figuring stuff out. It's the scientist. If this is the artist, this is the scientist. Okay, so let's talk about how that works itself out. And again, we're pretty far down the tree here. So now we tend to be talking a little bit more about states of imbalance. So looking at the 8 of Wands, now we have activity, okay? But it's activity that's moving very fast, and it may be without much guidance system, which is why when you look at that card, you just see these wands flying across the sky. And but it's kind of like it's about doing because you can, which can of course be somewhat catastrophic. That's what scientists often do. They do it because they can. There's no question about whether they should. They just do it because they can. And if you forget the should, you're in trouble. And it also can be a distraction in the sense that if you're trying to actually create something and then you just get lost in just doing stuff, you get lost in the details and you forget the actual overlying vision, what happens is a lot of energy gets expended but nothing very much gets done. So this is a card about, 8 of Wands is a card about activity and movement. Sometimes it can include the meaning of change of place. That a person is actually moving, But I think the positive is there is a lot of movement. And that can be a good thing if you have a reading where you have a lot of static cards. So sometimes, that's a good thing. On the other hand, it can be a lot of movement to not very much purpose. So there may be frustration in it. Because, you sort of, it's a sort of more of that flailing around thing, It's like you had the moment in the zone, now everything's flying in the air, but you're not in the zone anymore. It's just flying all over the place. And it ends up, it's like shooting an arrow. I always think about this. You shoot an arrow, and if you don't shoot it out, it just goes straight up, and then it comes back down very close to where you actually sent it off. So that would be the negative of this card. Is if you don't have enough direction. If it just becomes activity for the sake of activity. And that is easy to do with Mercury. Because Mercury is very fast. One of the things that's interesting about people who have a strong Mercury in their astrological chart is they often are very fast. I have a very strong Mercury. My mind is very fast. Sometimes too fast. Right? Gets me in trouble. So Mercury is a very fast sign. And when you combine that with fire, which is already very, very, very active, it can become a kind of hyperactivity that actually doesn't get anything done. And that, in fact, is the problem with hyperactivity, is that there's tons of activity, but nothing gets done because it lacks focus, right?
There's no person in that card, so.
Right, exactly. It's all just movement. And that's interesting too. I don't know that there are any other cards like that. That may be the only Lesser Arcana that doesn't have a figure in it. Let's see if that's true. Well, there's a heart, but
The aces don't.
well, no. No, the aces don't. Because they're about potential. But all the rest have some figure in them, even if it's only the heart. Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and I've never noticed that before. Thank you, that was good. All right, let's go on to the 8 of Cups. This is an interesting card. Once again, in this card, we have, and what we're doing is we're taking this mercurial energy, the energy of Mercury, the how-to, into the realm of relationships. And what's interesting about that combination is that it seems to be about exploration. So, but the exploration, in this case, when you look at the picture, what's going on? The guy's leaving the cups behind. So this is often about when people choose to leave behind the relationship that they've been working on, whether it's with another person or even with themselves, because they're going off to look for something bigger. In the picture, what you see is water, like an ocean, and also you'll notice that there's this moon. Actually, it's kind of a sun moon. But there's a moon face that's shining down, and so there's this wanting to leave behind what is known and go off and explore, which is a very mercurial thing. Go off and travel into new emotional realms. And you can look at it in the positive as a deepening, or you can look at it in the negative as a fleeing from. It could be either. But one of the things that I think is interesting about the iconography of this card is you have this figure with a red cape and with the red shoes and with the walking stick. That's a very, very old figure. You encounter it over and over again in fairy tales. And it's representative of the youth, male or female, but it's typically male, who takes up his walking staff and goes out to have an adventure, to explore the world. This is like the hero's journey. So, which is one reason why I tend to read this card positively most of the time. Because usually it's not just a turning away from the comfort of the cups. out of a sense of discontent or boredom. It's usually turning away from the comfort of the cups because one is seeking something more profound. And that is sort of in that idea of the youth who puts on his red cape and becomes the red wanderer. What that is about is this idea of looking for a deeper, truer sense of self, and also an expanded and more empowered world. So this is really about taking on, I think generally this card is about taking on a growth process, going and seeking a deepening of the emotional realm or the emotional experience. The thing is, if you get that card though, and there's a tension in the reading between that and where the other cards seem to be pointing toward a need for settling and for creating a strong base, then you might question, you might end up saying, well, you have this feeling like you need to go off and seek something bigger, but I think the bigger thing is actually really waiting for you at home. Maybe you need to look at that, because look at these cards here, here, and here, So and because one of the things that's really tricky is, and this is where doing a reading becomes a magical thing in a sense, when you're in the zone, when you're having one of those moments, you can look at that card and you may have a person sitting across from you don't know from Eve, you don't know from Adam or Eve, just complete stranger, and you can say, okay, what I see here is that you feel like you need to leave behind your family, your home. You need to go off on this great adventure. Something's really calling you. But look, the cards are telling you this is a pipe dream. What you really need is to nail your feet to the floor. And when you're on, you just know. There's just that moment where, and you just see those eyes, and it's like, how did she know that? It's kind of funny. All right. Is that one clear? That red wanderer is an important theme. 8 of Pentacles. Now, this is a happy card, even though it's pretty far down the tree, in the sense that you have Mercury, which is very much a card of work and technology and science and all of that, and you have it smack in the physical realm. That's a pretty good combination. That's a good pairing. It more than makes up for its being so far down on the tree, in my opinion. This is the card of a person who is actively at work, busily involved in creation. And generally, I would say it's a pretty positive card. It could be negative if the person is sort of like a hamster in a wheel, and they're just like work, no fun, no play. But largely, it's a positive card. So, and it generally indicates that, a person is going to be making good use of their skills. And again, the only negative that I would see here is if you have a reading where it indicates, there are lots of things indicating that they need to stop, they need to pause, they need to think, they need to play, they need to reflect, then I wouldn't be so happy about that card, right? Then I would go, well, I don't like that there, So you begin to see what I mean when I say how context is so critical. All right. Now, let's look at the 8 of Swords. Very tricky card. I talked about this card a little bit earlier. This is in the realm of thought. Okay, now you would think Mercury in the realm of thought, well, that's got to be a good thing. And it is in some instances, and it isn't in others. One of the things that can happen is you can get to the point where you are held captive by your own thought process. And that's what this picture is about. But it's a sort of a red herring. The woman really isn't held captive. She just thinks she is. And so this is about when we get ourselves, painted into a corner, when we've thought ourselves into a fix. We think we can't do something. We think we have to do something. You know what I mean? So this card comes up a lot of times when people say, well, but I can't drop out of graduate school. I remember saying this one once. I can't right now because, and then I had my list of becauses, and this was my first therapist, and she looks at me. This was my first session too, and she says, of course you can. So I went off and I thought for about 2 weeks, and I dropped out of graduate school, and I went back, and she said, boy, was I surprised when you came back and said you dropped out. This was years later, but it was funny. She said, boy, was I surprised. She said, I thought, well, oh, okay. But anyhow, that's the Eight of Swords. When you get yourself into one of those fixes where you've thought yourself into a box, and you think, I have to do this, or I can't do that, or this is the only way it'll work. And you have to, it's another form of stasis. It's a little bit like, remember when we talked about the negative of the Four of Swords, that you could become too static in your thinking. This is another form of stasis, where you get fixated. On the other hand, there is a positive side to this card, which is not reflected very well in this, and that is that thought can also make you free. Behind the woman are the swords that can free her. All she has to do is rub those bonds right up against the edge of one of those swords, and they're going to fall right off. So thought can both constrain you or it can free you. And that's...
Could this card be interpreted as she knows her path so well she can do it bound and blindfolded?
No, I don't think so, because look, she's surrounded. It's fencing her in. Although not entirely.
No,
That again is part of the, I think the blindfoldedness though is it's not seen. But that's an interesting thought, David. Let's think about this for a minute. So let's go back to the Two of Swords for a moment, and remember we have a blindfolded figure in equipoise, and there she has willingly blindfolded herself so that she can shut out the distractions and focus inward. But I think in this instance the blindness is imposed by her own process, and she needs to free herself. But that there is that possibility. In other words, if we open up our thought, if she starts thinking, if she starts questioning, she can free herself. It's a very obvious thing. It's similar to another card that you're going to see when we look at the trumps, which is the devil, where you see the two figures, the man and a woman, chained to the feet of the beast. But if you look at the collars, they're huge. They could just lift them off over their heads. They just have to realize it. Same thing is true in this card. So when this comes up, if it comes up in a positive way, one of the things that you could say is the positive aspect is you may feel bound and you may feel constrained, but in fact it is totally a mental construct. Change your thought and you will change your circumstance.
She's wearing a red coat too, like the...
Yes, like the red man. Right, exactly.
It almost doesn't matter which way she goes either. She's going to be able to rub up against a sword.
That's exactly right. If she backs up, she's going to find them. If she goes side to side, she's going to find them. Oh, that's it. Look, the only way that she won't find those swords, which will set her free, is if she goes straight forward. So there it is again. There's a way where you think there's only one path. But if you just try something else. All right, so that would be the Eight of Swords. Interesting card. Very interesting card. All right. And it's interesting. I want to point something out too, which is that the further down the tree you get in Earth, the further you get toward manifestation, the cards tend to be happier and happier. in some ways. The further you get down the tree in thought, which is very insubstantial, the trickier it gets, right? That's an interesting thing, isn't it? The same thing is true with wands. The further down the tree you get into manifestation, the trickier it is. Cups, again, mostly it gets better. So that tells you something about that, just again, the different realms, you know?
The two passive elements get better.
The passive elements get better because passive elements like to be solid. They like to be manifest. The active elements, fire and air, don't like to be manifest so much. You know, it's trickier. Or maybe it's not that they don't like, but it's just trickier. All right. The 9 of Wands. Wow. Well, now we're back in the center again. So we're back into balance, sort of. But in this case, what we've got is, okay, lots been going on, right? We've just been through staying on top of stuff and maybe being in the zone or maybe falling off. And then we've had all this wild activity. And now, here is our hero, bandage around his head, clutching his wand rather nervously, having come through the battle, but thinking, geez Louise, do I ever want to do that again? It's kind of like moms in the first week after childbirth, you know? Right? Oh my gosh. So there you are. All right, so the 9 of Wands, this is about, okay, now we're down at the moon. And the moon, this is just sod. This is tricky because now at this point, all of the emanations of these planets, each contributes its bit. It pours into the moon, which is a cup to capture it, right? And that in turn gives birth to the manifestation. This is the template. This is the final blueprint, and here's the house. Right? So this is the template. And so when you, in terms of talking about the cards, the way we often think about the 9 is this is the absolute peak of that energy, whatever it is, before it finally just blam, completes. So this tends to be the best or the worst in a suit, these 9s. The best and the worst, for sure. And so it's kind of like the energy's built. Now it's at full tide, and then plop, it becomes manifest. All right. So here we are with our 9 of Wands. So now lots of experience. So when this card appears, one of the things you can say is, "Wow, you've had a lot of experiences." Some of them have probably bruised you, some of them have taught you, but for sure, you have accumulated a lot of experience. You have been through a lot. And the positive of that is, hopefully, you're really close to being able to manifest what it is you want to do. You're really close to being able to finalize your creation. And the negative that sometimes happens with this is that there you are, right at the final moment, one little tiny push and it's going to complete. And what happens? You get paralyzed. You just chicken out. You know? So a lot of times when this card comes up, it's a call to say to the person, for heaven's sakes, don't give up. You know what I mean? Have you ever had that happen where you see somebody who struggled and fought, you know, to get all the way through medical school, and all they have to do is sit for their boards, and they can't do it? What was that? You know? And because, you know, they may have been just so bruised by the experiences, they're exhausted at a certain level. In the negative, most negative sense, the person may have reached this point and they are burned out, exhausted. But generally speaking, it's a positive card. Mostly it comes up in what you say is, wow, good job. You've really, really done a lot. You've really accumulated a lot of experiences. You know, you've taken a few whacks, but you're wiser for it. Party on. Then we come down to the 9 of, where are we? Cups. Once again, back in balance. And this is where all of that hard work of relationship of exploring the inner self or exploring the other finally culminates in a kind of satiety, a kind of fullness. So this is generally a card of happiness. It's really pretty great. It's usually a card where, boy, you know, I am really just savoring and reflecting and enjoying all of this wonderful expansion and growth. But it can occasionally be a card of intoxication. So there is a way where sometimes, you know, you just, especially if it's an unbalanced kind of emotionality that the person has been going through, where, you know, it just gets more and more addicting. Don't see that too often, but it can happen. And the moon is very much about emotions and moods and feelings, which is why I say this can sometimes be a kind of an emotional intoxication, a kind of a, not necessarily like a drug experience, but literally being intoxicated by one's emotions, becoming totally in the grip of them. And we all know that. There are some people who literally just live their lives like that. The Nine of Pentacles. This, again, thinking of this as the culmination. So there's been a lot of work, there's been a lot of building and creation, and now one achieves success. This is often a card that comes up when somebody has reached a point where they really are literally pretty successful. They're independent, they have the means to control their own lives. You know, I love this card. Here it is, a woman alone in her garden, in abundant, and if you look at her robe, look what's on it. She's got, those are Venus symbols, aren't they? I can barely see that, but I'm pretty sure they're little Venus symbols. So, which is, you know, fertility, it's abundance, she's got everything she needs. On the other hand, it can also be a withdrawal into a kind of self-imposed, I don't need anybody isolation. Doesn't, again, generally, nines are pretty good cards, but I have seen it show up that way, where somebody's managed to build enough success around them that fundamentally they can just kind of say, well, I don't need anybody or anything, you know? Like, so for example, this card came up for me when I was probably about 31 or 32, and actually it was when I was getting married, so I must have been 32. I had been a single mother for about 3.5 years, and I really wanted to be married, but that card came up for me, and it was a very telling card. It was a lot about my own attitude, and what had happened was I had gone through a few brutally hard years where I had to scramble to support myself, start a practice, deal with everything all by myself with this baby. And here I was going into marriage, and I was finally pretty successful. I was financially stable, but you know, I went into that marriage for the first year or two with a little bit of an attitude. If it doesn't work out, who needs you anyway? I can do this by myself. Thank you very much. Not the best attitude when getting married. So, 5 years in marital counseling fixed that. All right, so one can have those kinds of, you know. So, you know, on the one hand, of course, at the time, it was funny. I remember that until just recently. I was flipping through some old journals, and I saw that reading, and I was like, oh, my goodness. Because, of course, at the time, the way I interpreted it was, oh, you know, well, you know, I'm really, you know, I'm just doing so well here. Yeah, well, somebody should have read that for me. All right, Nine of Swords. This is, boy, this is an awful card in the sense that when you look at it, you just kind of go, ugh. I talked about this card earlier. It's actually not as bad as it looks. What it is it's that middle of the night anxiety burst where you think, oh my goodness, what am I doing? You know, what is the meaning of my life? Why am I in this job? Why am I in this marriage? Why am I whatever? And it's that, you know, that kind of sense of panic where your mind runs away with you and just gets carries all the way down. So that's the negative. On the other hand, the positive, the way I usually read this card in a positive sense is there's nothing very positive about this experience except for the fact that you can say to the person, it's a kind of, again, piggybacking off the Eight of Swords, is you can say, look, this is in your mind. Your mind. This is a good time to put on your headphones and with Om Mani Padme Hum or something, you know, but, you know, shut the mind up. You don't need it. It's not serving you here. But at any rate, you know, sometimes it's actually useful for people to hear that, you know, and you can just say, look, you know, you're really going through a lot of self-doubt and a lot of agonizing anxiety, but it's really okay. This is just a moment. It will pass. It will pass. And it's the accumulation of a lot of thought. It's also the kind of, and in a more positive sense, this is the kind of, this card comes up in that moment, that final pause before the whole thing manifests. And it's just that little fleeting anxiety of, oh gosh, come on. You know what I mean? So it's anticipation. It does not have to be negative necessarily, but it often is. All right, final one. Holy cow, you guys, we're gonna do it. 10, let's talk about the 10s. I think I said earlier that the 10s are about manifestation and completion, and when you hit the 10, the thing is done. And there's also a beginning to move into the very next thing. So there's often, there's a little underbelly there of dissatisfaction or restlessness. So when we look at the 10 of Wands, here we are. This is me, I swear. This is me at this moment in time. Having taken on a huge bunch of projects, and actually I'm just carrying them the last final steps to completion before I collapse and fall over and Jeff has to scrape me up off the floor. So, yeah, really, oh, jeez. This last year has just been like, so the good news about this card is, wow, you're just about home. And boy, I know you feel like you're gonna fall over, but it's okay, you're gonna make it. The end is in sight. It's like that moment when you're running a marathon and you come around the final bend and there's the cheering crowd and you can see the rope up ahead of you and your wrist and you, oh boy, you think, I can't make it, but you gotta just push one more little bit and you blow through. So the other thing that can happen in a more negative sense is this card can sometimes be the card of really being burdened. You know, you've taken on a huge load and boy, do you feel burdened. But there again, the good news about that is it's a 10. And the next is what comes after Wands? Water. Cups. So you're gonna turn away from all of that activity back to your own inward life. I'm really looking forward to that one. That is gonna be fun. So so that's what the 10 of Wands is about. It's that completion of a huge bunch of creation and work and like I said, it can feel like a huge burden at the end. But it's good in a lot of ways. But one of the things that people really, really need to do when they are at that 10 of Wands is they have to get ready to shed something so they can go on to the next phase, which is to turn back to their inner life. There's a rhythm in life that we have to maintain, and part of the reason why we get so sick is we lose that rhythm. There has to be a rhythm between the intense, focused, creative effort and the internal. Really has to be there. It's the in-breath and the out-breath, the day and the night, the activity and rest. Then coming to the 10 of Cups, we see our culmination, and this is often a marriage card. It's the card of the happy family, of, you know, everything's finally, you know, this wonderful sense of completion. And the underbelly is when we reach that moment of, oh my gosh, I finally got it all, we begin to feel the need to turn away. Turn to something else, a new idea, a new something. That's always there. But this is fundamentally a happy card. I almost never see that in a negative context. It's just a happy card. It's the rainbow, you know, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, only it's in the emotional sense. So it's one's having arrived at a deeper integration of self, or having, you know, successfully really negotiated friendship and love. The Ten of Pentacles, again, generally quite a happy card. This is a card of the happy home, of abundance, of, you know, everything's worked out, you've got everything that you need. And there is also, though, again, the underbelly there is little discontent. So humans being humans, enough is never enough. Then we want to move on to some, but of course, what comes after Pentacles is you go back up to fire. So once you've achieved everything, you need to create something new. You can't just stay there and, that really is true about us as humans. Is once you know you've succeeded, you've made that business work, you've created you got the farm, you got the whatever, the second house, or the whatever it is you really were jonesing for, then you got to go create something new, another challenge, right? And that would be the Ten of Pentacles. But that's generally a card of great abundance. That is a very, very fortunate card. You'll notice again, water and pentacles, cups and pentacles, tend to be more fortunate at the bottom of the tree. Now we turn to the Ten of Swords. Everybody goes, ugh, when they look at that thing. And, that's not a happy looking card, is it? But what you have to remember is it's completion. It's the thought has finally played itself out. Okay? So whatever the in the realm of thought, you've finally gotten to the end of the line. And that's both good and bad. The good part is you're at the end of the line, and it may mean the satisfaction of actually having carried, a whole realm of thought out. Like if you were a mathematician, it might mean that you had created that new equation, or Einstein after the theory of relativity. But then where do you go after that? You have to go somewhere. You have to start over.
To Disney World.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, actually, where you go after that is Pentacles. You have to start figuring out how to make it work in the physical realm. So you create an atom bomb. Yeah, or nuclear power, depending on who's running the show. All right, so, but the good news about this card is forever, for better or worse, you're done. So when this card shows up, I often say to people, well, you've been through a rough time, but guess what? It's done. It's dead. It's over. It's done. But here's the other thing that I find really interesting. So 10 swords piercing that poor guy's back, but look where they are. They're right in the spine. The 10 Sephira right up on the spine. So I also think it's kind of about, being sort of punctured so that we can, be enlightened or shaken up to the next level. So I don't really see this as such an awful card, even though it looks really awful. I sort of see it as, okay, you're at the end of that road, and now the possibility opens up something entirely new.
So it's just an extreme form of acupuncture.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody wants to try it, I'll get my swords out. And we'll So there we go. So there are our 10s.
Me, I knew you were gonna pick me. I knew it.
You want a reading?
Sure.
All right, we're going to do a reading. And
Sure.
I'm going to show you what's kind of like a modified Celtic cross, which is sort of fun. But I'm going to do it just with the Lesser Arcana, so we have a chance to sort of see what that looks like. So let me just pull the trumps out really. Gosh, yeah, there are millions of different layouts. I've designed quite a few of them myself. On the final day, I'm going to teach them. I'm going to teach like 4 or 5 or 6. Like some layouts are better for yes and no kinds of questions. Others are, like the Celtic Cross, which is the one I'm going to do right now, is one of my favorite layouts for just general reading, just to kind of give a sense. So I'm going to ask you to shuffle the cards, and what we're going to do is I'm going to just give you a reading on where you are at the moment.
It's also what you find in almost every little white book that comes with the tarot deck.
Right, but they don't explain it for shit, but that's all right.
Stay on this side.
No embarrassing outlets, please.
All right. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to begin with a little ritual that I personally do. You can invent your own. And what I'm going to do is actually it's Kabbalistic cross, which is Ate Malkuth Begevura Begedula Leolam Amin, which is to say, I am the power, the glory. I am the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. May the truth be with us. May we be given the power to see, the wisdom to understand, and the courage to act. I ask this in thy name. All right. So here's our first position. This covers you. This crosses you. This is above you. This is below you. Behind you. Before you. Yourself. Your house. Hopes and fears. And outcome. All right, so let me explain a few things about this. This first pillar here has to do with the internal self, primarily. This pillar over here has to do much more with the external self. These two cards here, or this crossbar, has to do with influences. That's just a really quick down and dirty. Okay, so this is where you are right now. Ooh, this is interesting. Yeah.
Can you just say again what you said, covers
Yeah,
and crosses
please.
you, above you,
Okay,
below you?
number one, this covers you, and often you'll use a card as a significator. I'll talk about that later. And you would just lay this card on top of it. This crosses you. This is the obstacle card. Crosses you, right? This is above you. This is what we hope to attain. This is the best that can come out of the reading if we really work hard on ourselves. This is below you. This is your foundation. It's your strength. It's your ace in the hole. It's the qualities that are inside you or the circumstances in the moment that will support you. This is behind you, meaning the immediate past. Thank heavens. This is before you, the coming influence, the incoming influence. This is yourself. This is how you think about yourself in the moment. This is your house. This is your environment, what's around you. This is your hopes and fears. Otherwise, I talk about it as the central ambivalence. This is your outcome. Lots of change.
Oh, there's been a lot, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can share with the rest of the class, I don't mind.
Okay. So, at the very beginning, this first card, what we're thinking about is this is what is driving you from the deepest level. This is your evolutionary urge, the thing that's really wanted to be born in you right now. And you have a very Venus card, which is great because we like our evolutionary urges to be being led by some sort of visionary impulse. So this is a case where the Seven of Cups is actually in a very positive position because your evolutionary urge right now is to really explore. So you're in a state of exploration where you're actually opening yourself up to many, many possibilities in a rather open-ended way, which I think is good because actually you're coming out of a period that's been very Saturnian, where life and circumstances have held you pretty hard, held your feet to the fire pretty hard. You've had a lot going on, and I would wager some sorrow in there, some real sorrow. And so having gone through that, you're now really beginning, it's opened you up, it's cracked you open, and so now you're actually beginning to open up and have, there's this sense in this really deep way of like, wow, there's a lot of stuff out there I had no idea. So that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. But of course the obstacle, the thing that you have to struggle with is fixed patterns of thought that have become, that are limiting. So you can feel on a deep level, on this evolutionary level, you can feel like, whoa, there's a lot of possibilities out there. But you're in the habit of drawing yourself in, of pulling yourself back, of staying in a narrower space. So that's something you want to override. And it's interesting because you actually are, you have the Knight of Rods as your strength. And that's air, of course, and it's air in the suit of fire. So, you know, one of the things that's actually good about you is even though you've had this self-limiting patterns in some way of thought, you're not actually prone to that. You're sort of a person who's actually kind of likes adventures, and you're not afraid of them. You're really not afraid to take the world on. So that's your strength, that your basic personality is kind of like, I'm going to go out and see what's out there, right? So that is a part of you that you want to really highlight right now because it's good. It's good for you, and I think that a lot of this obstacle is just because you've had to make hard choices, and you've gotten in the habit of having to make hard choices. Well, maybe you don't have to make those hard choices anymore. Yahoo! Because look what's coming in. So your incoming influences, this is a happy card. So you're going from the Three of Swords, having to go through some hard and difficult experiences, which have taught you a lot. But sometimes they harden us in the sense that we lose our sense of the horizon. But you're ready now to push out of that. And what's coming in is actually going to be a lot of good energy. Certainly in the physical realm, things should be good. Your health and finances. You know, I think you're moving into a state of abundance. Really, into a state of abundance. But I want to say something, even though this is Pentacles, and we would normally read this as a card more about your physicality, and certainly that is a good thing too. I think it's more about moving into a state of a sense of abundance in the possibilities. That's what you're moving toward, this more abundant sense of possibility, and that's what your being is pushing for. And what's interesting is up here, this is probably the most negative card in the reading, but in this context, it's not, because this is the best that can be arrived at, or this is the card of like what you're kind of going for. So remember how I said you had some self-limiting thoughts. It's habituated. You're going to break that up. Do you see how that works? That's a great example of how context determines the card. So we know that this has got to have some sort of positive meaning anyway, just because the position is somewhat positive in its nature. That's the whole point of it. But because it piggybacked onto this problem, you really get it, that you're going to overcome that problem. That's a beautiful thing when you see that kind of flow. So the self-limiting thoughts that represent your obstacles, you can get rid of them. You can break that up. Break up those old patterns. Over here, this is yourself. You're in a state of meditation. You're in a state of reconsideration. That's a good place for you to be. That's perfect because it goes with this. One of the things that you want to look for when you do a Celtic Cross reading is you want to look for how the person's attitude toward themselves and the evolutionary urge agree. These are both about a kind of an inward experience. That's an agreement. If she had something over here that was like, the Seven of Wands, I wouldn't be so happy. Because I would go, look, your inner being is calling to, consider all these wonderful possibilities, and you're over here running around like a chicken with your head cut off. That doesn't work. But in this case, we have a good agreement. And this is the one that you remember we talked about, the stillness of thought. Environment. Well, your environment's still going to have some chaotic moments. There's still stuff shaking down. But I don't think it's going to influence you in a negative way, so much as that you may be called upon to kind of reach out and help. But it'll be coming out of this place within you where you're feeling more resourceful. So you're going to feel like you have it to give. But, so there'll be some chaos around you, And maybe that's part of it for you too, is to be able to have some of that chaos around you and go, well, not me.
Hakuna Matata is my favorite word.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, whatever turns you on, you find it entertaining, okay. I don't think I want to go down that road, but hopes and fears. This is the thing that you both long for and you're not so sure about, and that would be the Two of Wands. Part of what you're exploring in this opening up to wonderful possibilities is you're really thinking about going out there and creating something. You don't know what yet, but there's a part of you that really wants to find something that is a unique expression of your own being. That's, I think, what this is about for you. The fear, of course, is always, can I do it? Is it possible? And that's where those self-limiting thoughts can get in the way. But I think you're really getting ready to push forward, because look at this final card. We have the Page of Cups. This is about new opportunities springing up, and they're surprising and funny and wonderful. There's that fish coming out of the cup. But you know what that also reminds me of is the story of the Fisher King we were talking about earlier, about being sustained. The fishes and that comes out. So I think there's this way where in the whole realm of your own relationship to yourself, your own inner vision, that you're going to have the opportunity to really reinvent yourself. That's a wonderful thing. And it'll be a reinvention that will feed you, just like the fishes in the cup. All right, that's a quick one. So how does that work for you? Does that make sense?
It works very good because I'm on a path that I want to be on, and I'll share with the class. My husband passed away 2 years ago, and he was a very abusive, alcoholic, bipolar person. I wouldn't wish this upon anybody to live with a person like that, because it's hell, and he makes your hell life. He makes your kids' hell life. So when he passed, he was ready to pass. He knew he was going to pass, because I have a picture that I framed where it's a picture of Jesus Christ, and he said, I'm ready for you. So he was tired of this life. And I've got that picture framed to remind me there's something better out there, and that's what I'm after. I sighed a relief when he died because the abuse was gone. So this is my turn, and it's my turn now to help people, because in my life, my grandfather always told me that people cross paths for a reason. You're supposed to help them, save them, something. In some way, shape, or form, I helped my husband. I kept my vows to him to the very end. Now it's my turn to help other people, and that's my path.
And that's the incoming influence. Look at that. Isn't that wonderful? It's about being helpful, but in a balanced way that makes room for you. Yeah. And you might have a new relationship too.
I'm hoping, cause I'm working on it.
'Cause, well, you've got,
I'm working on it.
because you've got those 2 cups, so you might very well end up at the end of this with a new relationship.
I just gotta kickstart him. Just not going anywhere. I don't know.
Well, good. All right, well, thank you
Thank
for
you.
allowing me to do that. So you get a little sense, yeah?
Question,
Uh-huh.
how does that, the card in the center at the top, how is that different from the outcome card? Like the best that can be arrived at and then.
Well, because the outcome card is really more about actual circumstances, where she's gonna end up. This is about what she's gonna learn, what's the gold that you're gonna mine in that experience, right? So sometimes you can actually have an awful outcome at one level. I mean, meaning that, like, let's say this was a reading about, if she wanted to start a business or whatever, and you had, like, the 5 of Pentacles as your outcome card. We would not be happy about that with the new business. But, she might have a card over here in the best that could be arrived at that would be about learning to find a clearer sense of vision. So I might say, well, you know what? I don't think this one's going to work, but you're going to come out of it with it. But go ahead anyway, because you're going to come out of it with a better idea of what it is you really need to do. That would be an example of how those 2 things are different. Now, what you're looking at when you play with the Celtic Cross is you really have to pay close attention between the relationships of the cards. All right? So, one of the things, like I said, is I pay close attention between the evolutionary impulse and the person's attitude toward themselves. Are they synchronous? I look at, influences, like what's the incoming influence, what's the environment. One of the things that's interesting is her environment is the 5 of Wands, which indicates a certain amount of chaos and a lot of things happening really fast. But the incoming influence is this being able to give from a place of abundance. So I'm not too worried about that environment, right? But if the incoming influence was, the 9 of Wands, then I go, wow, you got a really chaotic environment, and you got to watch out because you're going to get knocked on the head a couple times here, So you want to pay attention to those kinds of things, and I'm always triangulating. I'm looking at, for example, the lesson or what you can learn from the experience, and how does that fit in terms of the evolutionary drive. And then there was this wonderful synchronicity in this particular reading between the obstacle and the lesson, right? And what it indicated is the lesson was like, okay, you're going to overcome that obstacle. That's great. That's really nice. So you want to look for those kinds of ways in which the cards contextualize each other. It's very, very important. And it'll get easier as we go on. It'll become a little clearer as we go.